Imagine you have this cure for devastating, paralyzing disease right in your hands,
Yeah.
like a tiny glass vial. It costs pennies to manufacture.
Yeah.
It's perfectly safe.
Yeah.
It's been tested and refined for decades.
Yeah, totally settled science.
Exactly. Now, imagine that simply trying to deliver this cure, just to put 2 drops of it into the mouth of a toddler, makes you a target for assassination.
It's just chilling.
It really is.
Yeah.
Today, we aren't talking about a lack of medical science or, I don't know, some mysterious, incurable superbug. We are talking about what happens when the cure exists, the science is completely settled, but the battlefield simply won't let you deliver it.
Yeah, I mean, it is the ultimate geopolitical paradox. We have this unprecedented level of scientific mastery over the human body right now. We can map genomes, we can deploy targeted therapies.
Yeah.
Yet we're watching ancient diseases, like things we effectively conquered in the 20th century, make these shocking, devastating comebacks.
He's crazy.
And they're coming back because the pathogen has found, well, the one vulnerability our microscopes just can't fix.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today our deep dive is taking you to the invisible, incredibly dangerous intersection of geopolitics, warfare, and public health.
Yeah.
We're looking at a stack of incredibly detailed operational guidelines, global health policy reviews, and raw case studies from 16 different conflict-affected countries.
A lot of heavy reading for this one.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
But our mission is to understand the actual mechanics of how war dismantles a health system. We want to know why local volunteers are risking their lives running these covert hit-and-run vaccination operations with unmarked coolers.
Right.
And how, against all odds, the sheer biological necessity of medicine might actually be a backdoor to peace.
It really requires a profound shift in how we think about war. Because, we're conditioned to measure the cost of conflict and immediate trauma.
Right. Bullets, shrapnel, explosions.
Exactly. But the data forces us to look at the secondary, much more insidious wave of casualties. The people who die or are permanently paralyzed simply because the basic public health infrastructure around them just evaporated.
Right. And to really set the context for you, I want to look at a timeline that is, frankly, it's just heartbreaking. If we rewind just a bit to 2012, humanity had wild poliovirus backed into a corner.
We were so close.
We really were. It was endemic in exactly 3 countries: Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nigeria. That was it.
Yeah.
Public health officials were preparing for the final push. It genuinely felt like we were on the absolute brink of total global eradication. Like we were going to make polio the second human disease in history after smallpox to be wiped off the face of the earth.
The optimism was palpable back then.
Yeah.
But it was incredibly fragile.
Why is that?
Because polio is an extraordinarily opportunistic virus. I mean, it's an enterovirus, meaning it replicates in the human gut and spreads through the fecal-oral route.
The sanitation is everything.
Exactly. In places with robust sanitation and high vaccination rates, it hits a dead end. But the moment sanitation collapses and vaccination stops, it just explodes.
And that explosion happened in 2014. The World Health Organization had to declare a public health emergency of international concern. Polio didn't just survive, it surged.
Yeah, it sprang back up.
Right, in Syria, Cameroon, Iraq, and Equatorial Guinea.
It was a massive psychological blow, but an even bigger operational nightmare, because the virus had escaped the 3 corners we thought we had it trapped in.
Yeah.
And if you look closely at that list of countries where it resurged...
Syria, Iraq, Cameroon.
Right, you immediately see the common denominator. It wasn't a sudden mutation in the virus, it was the sudden outbreak of localized and regional violence.
So if you've ever wondered why we can't just eradicate these diseases once and for all, today we are taking you straight to the front lines. To really understand how a virus moves in the modern world, you have to look at the disproportionate math of conflict zones.
And the math is brutal.
It really is. Before we even get into the tactical playbook of how a vaccine is smuggled across a checkpoint, we need to grasp the sheer staggering scale of how conflict acts as a super catalyst for disease.
Yeah, there's a comprehensive review of 16 high-risk countries that really paints the picture here.
Tell us about that.
So these are nations eligible for support from JAVIA. JAVIA is the Vaccine Alliance, a massive global health partnership focused on increasing access to immunization in poor countries.
Right.
And the 16 countries studied all share one grim characteristic. They each have over 500,000 displaced persons.
Wow. Just to give you the scope of who we are talking about, this list includes the Democratic Republic of Congo, Pakistan, Sudan, South Sudan, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Myanmar, Somalia.
It's a heavy list.
It is. the Central African Republic, Ukraine, Cote d'Ivoire, Yemen, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and Chad.
When you map global outbreaks, those 16 nations form the epicenter of the crisis. And the statistics regarding their impact on global health are incredibly stark.
Yeah.
You really have to look at the ratio of population to disease burden to understand what's happening.
Right. Here is the absolute jaw-dropping statistic. These 16 countries represent just 12% of the global population.
Basically 1 in 8 people on Earth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But between 2010 and 2015, they accounted for 67% of all global polio cases.
Wow.
And 39% of all global measles cases. 12% of the people, nearly 70% of the polio.
It completely reorients how you view an epidemic, right? I mean, a virus does not spread uniformly like a stain on a map.
How does it spread?
It's almost like water. It seeks out the lowest ground, it seeks out vulnerabilities, and violent conflict strips away every single layer of societal defense.
Yeah.
What that data proves is that war isn't just a hurdle to public health, it's the primary engine driving these outbreaks.
Let's break down exactly how fast that defense gets stripped away. In public health, there is a metric called the DPT-3 vaccine.
Right.
That stands for diphtheria, pertussis, which you probably know as whooping cough, and tetanus. It requires 3 doses to be fully effective, which makes it an incredible benchmark.
Yeah, it's the gold standard metric.
If a child has received all 3 doses of DPT-3, it means the health system is functioning.
Yeah.
It means there's a clinic, there are cold storage units, there are trained staff, and the parents have enough stability to bring the child back multiple times.
Exactly. It measures the routine, day-to-day operational capacity of a country's medical infrastructure.
Right.
The global average for DPT-3 coverage usually sits around 85%. And that 85% threshold is critical because of a concept called herd immunity.
Which we've all heard a lot about recently, but let's define it specifically in this context.
Sure. Herd immunity is a biological firewall of a community. When a high enough percentage of the population is vaccinated, like that 85%, the virus can't find enough susceptible hosts to sustain an outbreak.
Yeah.
It might infect 1 or 2 people, but it hits vaccinated individuals and the chain of transmission breaks. The community acts as a shield for the vulnerable few who can't be vaccinated, like newborns or the immunocompromised.
Right.
But when coverage drops significantly below that threshold, the firewall collapses.
And in 14 of those 16 conflict-affected countries, coverage falls well below that 85% global average. In 6 of them, it falls below 50%.
And at 50%, you have no firewall. You have a wide-open door. The virus can tear through a population with terrifying speed.
And the collapse isn't gradual either. It's not like
Yeah.
the system slowly degrades over a decade. Look at Ukraine.
Yeah, that's a wild example.
Between 2012 and 2013, before the conflict really broke out, they were maintaining a relatively stable 76% coverage rate for DPT-3. Not perfect, but close to the average.
Right.
In 2014, when the fighting started, it plummeted to 23%. And by 2016, it was down to 19%.
19%. That's practically nothing. And if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
you see the exact same free fall elsewhere.
Where else?
South Sudan achieved independence in 2011, and they had managed to get coverage up to 75%.
That's pretty good.
It was. Then severe post-independence civil conflicts erupted. By 2014, coverage had collapsed to 46%. Yemen is another textbook example. They were sitting at 73% in 2014. The current conflict escalated, and within a year, by 2015, they fell to 47%.
You know, I always pictured a health system in peacetime like a leaky boat. You have to constantly bail water out.
Yeah.
That bailing is the routine maintenance, the regular vaccination drives, keeping the supply chains running, paying the nurses.
Yeah, it's exhausting work.
Right. It takes constant everyday work just to stay afloat. But a civil war isn't just a bigger leak in the boat. It's like someone is actively destroying the dock, blowing up the shipyard, and assassinating the people who know how to build the pumps.
That is painfully accurate, because you aren't just losing a shipment of vaccine vials, the destruction is systemic.
Yeah.
You're losing the roads required to transport the vials. You're losing the electrical grid required to power the refrigerators. And crucially, you are experiencing massive human capital flight.
The doctors are leaving.
Exactly. Doctors, nurses, and logisticians flee the violence just like everyone else. They take their expertise with them, leaving a massive, unfillable vacuum.
Which makes me wonder about the mechanics of the outbreak itself. Is the primary issue that the physical infrastructure, the clinics and the fridges, is being vaporized by artillery? Or is it that the people themselves are moving so fast and in such chaos that public health officials simply can't track who is vaccinated and who isn't?
Honestly, it's a deadly feedback loop of both. But the movement of people is what transforms a localized tragedy into a regional or global emergency.
Okay.
When populations flee violence, they create what epidemiologists call common reservoirs for viruses.
Explain how a common reservoir forms in these conditions. Like, what does that actually look like?
Imagine thousands of people fleeing a besieged city. They don't have access to clean water or sanitation.
Right.
They're pushed into incredibly crowded informal settlements or official refugee camps. Stress and malnutrition weaken their immune systems.
So they're physically vulnerable too.
Extremely. You have forced a massive group of highly vulnerable, increasingly unvaccinated people into close proximity. That is a reservoir. And once a virus like measles or polio enters that reservoir, it amplifies instantly.
Because it's an enterovirus.
Yeah.
If there's no sanitation, it's spreading through contaminated water sources almost immediately.
Precisely.
Okay.
But the reservoir doesn't stay still. As the conflict shifts, these displaced populations continue to move, often across international borders seeking safety.
Yeah.
And they carry the amplified pathogen with them into neighboring countries.
The cross-border spread between Afghanistan and Pakistan is a prime example of this, right?
Right, absolutely. That specific border region, the Durand Line, is incredibly porous and historically heavily affected by conflict and anti-government forces.
Okay.
The population there is highly mobile, moving back and forth across the border to trade, visit family, or escape military operations. You cannot possibly contain a virus in Afghanistan if the people are constantly moving into Pakistan and vice versa.
It's impossible.
Right. The virus treats the two countries as a single, shared epidemiological zone.
There is a really harrowing example of how fast this moves in the Horn of Africa. We're looking at a case from the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya.
Yeah, that case is sobering.
This is a massive complex. In 2013, it had an estimated population of 500,000 people. It's practically a city made of tents and temporary structures.
Yeah.
In that camp, a 4-month-old girl developed acute flaccid paralysis.
Acute flaccid paralysis, or AFP, is the primary clinical sign we look for when hunting polio.
Just to make sure we understand the gravity of that.
Yeah.
What exactly happens to the body when a child develops AFP?
So the poliovirus enters the mouth, multiplies in the intestine, and then invades the nervous system.
Okay.
It specifically attacks the motor neurons in the spinal cord. Within a matter of hours, the child experiences sudden onset of weakness and floppiness in their limbs.
Wow. Within hours.
Hours. That is the flaccid part, decreased muscle tone.
Ah.
They simply lose the ability to move their legs or arms. In severe cases, it paralyzes the breathing muscles, which is fatal.
Oh my God.
When a 4-month-old in a refugee camp suddenly goes limp, every public health alarm bell on Earth rings simultaneously.
Because if she has it, it means the virus is already circulating in the water supply of a camp holding 500,000 people.
Exactly. She tested positive for wild poliovirus type 1, and so did 2 of her contacts. For an epidemiologist, this is the nightmare scenario.
Right.
Dadaab is a dense, highly mobile environment. People are constantly arriving from war-torn areas of Somalia, and others are moving out. When people are fleeing for their absolute lives across the Horn of Africa, they aren't stopping to update their immunization cards.
Right. So the bombs fall, the clinic is destroyed, the people flee, and the virus spreads.
Yeah.
That is the physical reality of the collapse.
Yes.
But there is a secondary, much more insidious casualty of war that the data forces us to confront.
Yeah.
And that casualty is trust.
Yeah. Because without trust, the physical infrastructure is basically meaningless.
Right.
Well, you can rebuild a clinic with concrete, and you can buy a new solar refrigerator. But if the community does not trust the person holding the syringe, the vial will just sit there and expire.
We really have to shift gears here from the physical collapse of health systems to the psychological and political barriers. Because repairing trust is vastly harder than repairing a road.
Absolutely.
Especially when healthcare has been actively, deliberately weaponized.
The weaponization of medicine is one of the darkest developments in modern conflicts.
Yeah, and we have to talk about a highly charged historical event that severely damaged global health efforts. We're just looking at the facts, the fallout here.
Right.
During the hunt for Osama bin Laden, the CIA utilized a fake vaccination campaign in Pakistan as a covert intelligence gathering operation. They used local health workers to try and obtain DNA samples under the guise of an immunization drive.
And the fallout from that decision cannot be overstated. From a public health perspective, using a medical initiative as a Trojan horse for an intelligence operation had catastrophic, long-lasting consequences for legitimate vaccination programs across the entire region.
The backlash was immediate. Communities in Pakistan and Afghanistan, who were already harboring anti-Western sentiment, suddenly had their worst suspicions confirmed.
Yeah.
They began refusing legitimate life-saving vaccines because they simply no longer trusted the people administering them. It got to the point where, in January 2013, the deans of 12 of the most prestigious public health schools in the United States wrote an open letter to President Obama.
It was a very rare unified condemnation from the academic and medical community.
Right.
They explicitly argued that public health programs should never, under any circumstances, be used as cover for covert operations. They were defending a foundational concept called medical neutrality.
What exactly does medical neutrality mean historically? Like, how is it supposed to work in a war zone?
Historically, going back to the Geneva Conventions, there has been a global, unspoken, and spoken agreement that medical personnel are strictly neutral actors.
All right.
Their singular mandate is to heal. A medic is supposed to treat the wounded regardless of which uniform they are wearing, what religion they practice, or what side of the front line they are on.
Right.
This perceived and actual neutrality is the armor that allows doctors, nurses, and aid workers to safely cross into rebel-held territories, to navigate checkpoints, and to deliver care in the middle of a firefight.
But when an intelligence agency uses a medical campaign for espionage, it strips that armor away completely.
It shatters the illusion of safety. The moment the line between health security and national security is blurred, health workers are no longer viewed as impartial healers. They are immediately suspected of being spies, informants, or political pawns.
And the human cost of that perception is horrific. Health workers aren't just turned away, they are actively hunted.
Yeah.
In Pakistan, a targeted, coordinated attack left 22 polio workers and 4 police officers dead.
It's devastating. I mean, these are largely local citizens. They aren't foreign agents. They're community members trying to protect children.
It happened in Nigeria, too. In
Yeah.
Kano, at least 9 young women who were working on a polio vaccination campaign were assassinated by gunmen in 2 separate incidents in 2013.
Just awful.
Young women murdered in cold blood simply for carrying a cooler of vaccines.
It illustrates the absolute toxicity of the environment once trust is broken. Armed groups within these communities aren't just passively resisting the vaccine. They view the vaccine itself as a hostile Western intervention,
Right.
and they treat the vaccinators as enemy combatants.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I want to push back on this concept of pure medical neutrality.
Okay, go for it.
It sounds beautiful in a Geneva conference room,
Yeah.
but let's look at the reality on the ground. If a local population sees a box of vaccines arriving in the back of a foreign military convoy or being distributed by a national government that is simultaneously dropping barrel bombs on their neighborhood,
Yeah.
how can we possibly expect them to view that healthcare as neutral? Has the entire apparatus of traditional aid become so entangled with state power that neutrality is just a myth?
Well, I wouldn't call it a myth, but it is an incredibly fragile ideal that is buckling under the weight of modern asymmetrical warfare.
Okay.
You're highlighting the fundamental crisis in humanitarian aid today. In many of these conflicts, the state itself is the primary aggressor against a segment of its own population.
Exactly. So if the Ministry of Health sends a vaccination team, the local population just sees an extension of the military that bombed them yesterday.
And that puts international aid organizations in an impossible bind. International organizations like the WHO or UN agencies operate under mandates that require them to respect the sovereignty of the host nation's government.
We have to ask permission.
They legally have to ask the government for permission to operate.
Take Syria in 2013. When the polio outbreak hit, international organizations were severely constrained because the Syrian government initially refused them access to areas controlled by rebel forces.
Which creates a lethal delay. If an international aid group is waiting at the border for permission from a government in Damascus to enter a rebel-held city in Aleppo, the population inside Aleppo perceives that aid group as being complicit with Damascus.
Because they're waiting on the regime's say-so.
Exactly. They look at the aid workers and say, you only help us when the regime allows it. Neutrality is completely compromised in the eyes of the people who actually need the medicine.
Right.
The guidelines call for a tighter enforcement of medical neutrality, but they readily admit how impossibly complex that is when sovereignty, security, and survival are all competing.
So let's look at where that leaves us. We have completely shattered trust. We have the targeted assassination of frontline health workers. We have a breakdown of medical neutrality where aid groups are paralyzed by political
It's
sovereignty.
a mess.
Given all of this chaos, you would naturally assume that national governments and massive international bodies like the UN or GAVA would have meticulous, hyper-detailed contingency plans for displaced people. You would think, okay, we know the refugees are the most vulnerable, so they must be the center of the strategy.
It's the most logical assumption you could make, but when researchers actually audited the documentation, they uncovered a massive systemic blind spot in the global health bureaucracy.
It is genuinely shocking to read. The researchers reviewed the national planning documents for the 16 conflict-affected countries we've been tracking.
Yeah.
They looked at their official multi-year immunization plans. Basically, the blueprints for how these countries intend to protect their populations over the next half-decade.
Right.
Out of 14 available multi-year plans, only one even mentioned internally displaced persons, or IDPs.
It's what we call bureaucratic invisibility. On paper, at the strategic planning level, these millions of displaced people simply do not exist.
Let's look at the scale of who's being ignored. In 2014, Kenya was hosting over 600,000 refugees, a huge portion of them in the Dadaab camp we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Yet, if you read Kenya's national immunization plans and their annual progress reports submitted to international donors, there is zero mention of strategies to serve those refugees.
None.
Nigeria's plans completely ignored the 1.1 million people classified as persons of interest by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees within their own borders. Myanmar has over 800,000 stateless persons, primarily the Rohingya.
Right.
Other than a brief note about low coverage in Rakhine State, there are absolutely no specific operational strategies to expand services to them.
You really have to ask why. Why is there a blind spot the size of a small country? It is almost never an accidental oversight by an absent-minded bureaucrat. It's an intentional, underlying political mechanism.
But why intentionally ignore a million people carrying a highly contagious virus inside your own borders? That seems suicidal from a public health perspective.
Because public health isn't making the final call. Politics is. As we noted, in many of these internal conflicts, the national government is actively fighting the very populations that need the vaccines.
Wow.
Providing them with health infrastructure feels, to the government, like aiding the enemy.
And what about cross-border refugees? Like, Kenya isn't fighting the Somali refugees in Dadaab.
No, but host governments are deeply hesitant to establish permanent health infrastructure for populations they view as temporary burdens.
Ah, I see.
If Kenya or another host nation writes a comprehensive 5-year plan for refugee healthcare into their official national strategy, it implies a permanence.
It means they're staying.
It signals to the international community and to their own citizens that these refugees are staying. That is often politically unpalatable, so they just leave them out of the denominator entirely. If they aren't on the spreadsheet, the government isn't failing to meet their targets.
That bureaucratic erasure creates a massive, catastrophic disconnect when it comes to international funding. GAVI, the Vaccine Alliance, pours billions of dollars into these regions. But we need to look at exactly how that money is spent.
Yeah, the numbers here are really telling.
Over a set period, GAVI provided over $4.4 billion for vaccines and commodities to these 16 countries. $4.4 billion for the physical stuff.
The tangible goods.
Right. But funding for what is called health system strengthening, or HSS, which is the actual operational capacity to deliver the goods, was only around $549 million.
A huge drop-off.
Even worse, the civil society organizations, the local CSOs who actually do the dangerous groundwork, received less than $25 million. Out of $4.4 billion, the local groups got less than 1% of the total investment.
This metric exposes one of the most persistent flaws in international aid, the commodity bias. There's a massive difference between buying a commodity and funding an operational reality. Vaccines are commodities. They're tangible. You can manufacture them, put them in a box, ship them on a pallet, and most importantly for international donors, you can easily audit a spreadsheet showing exactly how many vials were purchased for $4.4 billion.
It's like sending millions of state-of-the-art smartphones to a country that just survived an earthquake. You drop pallets of phones on the tarmac, but you refuse to fund the construction of any cell towers, and you don't pay for anyone to teach the locals how to charge them.
Exactly.
You can take a great photo of the phones arriving, but you have provided absolutely no way to make them function.
I'd take that analogy a step further. It's like sending the smartphones, but the only people who know how to build the cell towers are considered political dissidents by the government, so you aren't allowed to pay them.
Oh,
The international community loves writing checks for the physical vials. It is a clean, measurable, apolitical win, but they are incredibly risk-averse when it comes to funding the complex, messy, hyper-localized work of health system strengthening.
so what does health system strengthening actually look like on the ground? What is that money supposed to pay for?
It pays for the human engine. It means paying local salaries so nurses don't have to flee to find work. It means buying spare parts to fix a broken solar panel on a refrigerator.
Right.
It means paying for the fuel to get a Jeep across a flooded road. It means funding the local civil society groups who actually know the terrain, who speak the dialect, and who know exactly which warlord to talk to at the checkpoint.
But the donors don't want to fund that because it's too murky.
Exactly. Funding operations in a war zone is an auditor's nightmare. It requires sending cash into places where international accountants cannot safely travel to verify the receipts.
Yeah,
It requires partnering with local actors who might be viewed as politically compromised or who might be forced to pay off a local militia just to get the Jeep down the road.
that makes sense.
So the massive institutional money flows strictly to the physical goods, and the result is literal warehouses full of life-saving vaccines sitting on a tarmac, slowly expiring because the delivery system, the human system, has been completely starved of funding.
So we have warehouses full of vaccines, but the national government won't claim the refugees on their spreadsheets, and the international community is too risk-averse to fund the local drivers.
Yeah.
So who actually gets the vial into the child's arm? How does the medicine cross the final, most dangerous mile?
This is where we have to look at the tactical playbook. Because when the top-down bureaucracy fails, and it almost always fails in a war zone, local actors and specialized task forces have to step into the void.
Okay.
They have to get incredibly creative, highly tactical, and frankly, very brave.
Let's break down these operations. The WHO implementation guidelines lay out exactly how these teams function in acute emergencies. They don't operate like a normal hospital.
Not at all.
The very first step when an outbreak hits a conflict zone is establishing an immunization task force, or ITF, and what they call an operational control room, the OCR.
And the entire purpose of the OCR is to cut through the bureaucratic fog. In the middle of a civil war, you cannot rely on standard, slow-moving reporting structures.
Right.
A Ministry of Health might take 3 weeks to process a request for syringes. The virus will have infected 10,000 people by then.
Wow.
The OCR is essentially a rapid response command center. It coordinates the logistics, it tracks the temperature of the cold chain, and it constantly monitors the security situation in real time.
The guidelines are incredibly strict about how the OCR handles data. They specifically mandate the use of simple core indicators. They explicitly warn, do not overburden the fragile system with unnecessary data collection.
Which is a huge departure from normal public health protocols, which are obsessed with comprehensive data.
Right. They're basically saying, do not ask a nurse who is dodging sniper fire to fill out a 30-page demographic report. A text message confirming that 500 doses were delivered today is enough.
Agility has to replace thoroughness. Agility is the only metric of success that matters here.
Okay.
In a peacetime environment, you build a fixed-site clinic, you staff it, and you expect the patients to come to you. In an area of active conflict, a fixed-site clinic is a death trap.
Because it's a target.
It's a stationary target for artillery, or, more likely, it has already been looted or reduced to rubble. So the tactical strategy has to completely invert. You must bring the clinic to the patients, wherever they are hiding.
The integration tactics they use to find the patients are brilliant. If you know that a displaced population is going to gather at a specific location for a UN food drop or a cash distribution from an NGO, you don't wait for them to come to a medical tent later.
No.
You set up a vaccination post right there at the food line. You integrate the medicine into the logistical arteries that are already pumping.
It is all about maximizing every single point of contact. If a World Food Program convoy has successfully negotiated passage through a rebel checkpoint to deliver grain, you put coolers of vaccines and a team of vaccinators on that exact same convoy.
You piggyback on it.
You piggyback on the access that others have bled to secure.
But what about areas where there is no UN convoy?
Yeah.
What about cities or neighborhoods where there is active, intense street-to-street fighting?
Yeah, that's where it gets really dangerous.
The implementation guides describe a strategy called quick in-and-out operations. The field workers just call them hit-and-run operations.
Hit-and-run operation is a highly calculated, incredibly tense gamble. The OCR is monitoring the security situation, usually through a network of local informants, and sometimes coordinating quietly with local security officials.
Okay.
They're not waiting for a peace treaty. They're looking for a temporary ceasefire, a religious holiday where fighting pauses, or even just a brief, unpredictable lull in the gunfire.
Just a tiny window.
A window of opportunity that might only last a few hours.
So they have the vaccines pre-positioned nearby. What happens when the window opens?
When the local contact radios in that the road is clear, the team rushes in. They don't set up a tent. They move house to house, or they gather children in a basement.
Wow.
They administer as many drops of polio vaccine or measles shots as physically possible in a matter of minutes or hours. And the second they sense the security situation degrading,
The second they hear gunfire.
the moment they hear gunfire returning to the sector, they pack up and rush back out. It is guerrilla healthcare.
It sounds utterly terrifying. The psychological toll that must take on a health worker.
Yeah.
I mean, you are asking a civilian to run into a war zone with a cooler.
It requires a level of courage and dedication that is very hard for us to fully comprehend sitting in a safe room.
Which brings us to another major tactical shift when the danger is just too high. Remote management. There are red zones where international staff or even staff from the national government simply cannot enter. If a Western doctor or a government official crosses into that territory, they will be kidnapped or killed immediately.
So the system relies entirely on the local community, and they bridge the expertise gap using commercial technology. The guidelines heavily discuss the use of WhatsApp and Skype.
It's wild to think of WhatsApp as a critical piece of global health infrastructure.
It absolutely is. If an international epidemiologist cannot enter a besieged city in Syria, they can still initiate a secure video call with a local volunteer inside the city.
Okay.
They can walk them through the injection protocols, they can look at a photo of a child's rash to confirm a diagnosis, and they can visually verify the temperature gauges on the cold chain equipment.
Let's talk about those volunteers. The tactical playbooks heavily emphasize recruiting and training female volunteers specifically to deliver these vaccines.
That is a critical cultural adaptation. In many conservative societies or highly localized tribal cultures, a male health worker, especially an outsider, cannot simply knock on a door and ask to enter a home to examine a child.
Right, it violates the norms.
It violates deep-seated social norms, but female volunteers who are known within the neighborhood can cross those domestic thresholds.
Yeah.
They have access to the inner life of the community that is completely walled off to outsiders. By empowering women in the community to run the vaccines, you leverage the existing social fabric to bypass the barriers created by the conflict.
Okay, we keep mentioning the cold chain. I want to dive into the physical logistics of this because it blew my mind.
Yeah.
Vaccines are fragile biological products.
Extremely fragile.
If they get too hot, the proteins denature and the vaccine is destroyed. If they freeze, the adjuvant separates and the vaccine is destroyed. They have to be maintained at a very specific narrow temperature range, usually between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius, from the moment they leave a factory in Belgium all the way to a syringe in a village in Yemen.
Right.
How on earth do you maintain a perfect 5-degree temperature when the power grid was blown up 6 months ago?
Maintaining the cold chain in a war zone is arguably the single greatest logistical challenge in global health. It requires constant improvisation. You cannot rely on grid electricity.
So what do they use?
You have to use solar-powered direct drive refrigerators. Or, in places where it's too dusty or dangerous for solar panels, you use absorption refrigerators that run on propane gas or kerosene.
But getting a steady supply of propane into a besieged city is a nightmare on its own.
Exactly. So the equipment is constantly at risk of failure. And there is a fascinating mechanical detail in the guidelines regarding how these refrigerators are packed.
Oh, yeah, this is so interesting.
In an emergency, human nature tells you to pack as many vials as possible into a single fridge. If you only have one working freezer left in the city, you want to cram every single drop of medicine into it.
Right, maximize this space.
But the guidelines strictly forbid it. They mandate that refrigerators must be left 1/3 empty. You have to leave massive gaps of empty air between the boxes of vaccines because of thermodynamic circulation. If you pack a fridge completely full, the cold air cannot circulate around the boxes. The vials in the back freeze solid and are destroyed.
Wow.
The vials in the front get too warm and are destroyed. The local health workers have to actively fight the desperate urge to hoard the medicine, deliberately leaving a third of their precious cold space empty just to ensure the thermodynamic flow keeps the remaining vaccines viable.
Wow. And then there's the visual aspect of the cold chain when they actually move the vaccines into the field. Normally, a vaccine carrier is this bright blue, highly recognizable plastic box with official WHO or UNICEF logos plastered all over it.
Yeah, you see them in all the photos.
It's designed to be highly visible so people know help has arrived.
But, as we discussed regarding the weaponization of healthcare, being highly visible in a war zone makes you a target.
Right.
If an armed group sees a bright blue UN box, they might see it as Western interference, or they might just see valuable medical supplies worth stealing to sell on the black market.
So the local workers completely changed the optics. The field reports note that in specific contexts, health workers deliberately use low-profile vaccine carriers.
Yeah, they ditch the official blue boxes entirely.
They use generic, unmarked, small ice chests. They wrap them in blankets. They put them in woven baskets.
Exactly.
They're essentially running covert ops, smuggling small, unmarked coolers through their own neighborhoods to save their neighbors' kids without drawing the attention of the militia on the corner.
It is a profound illustration of how the hostile environment dictates the physical strategy. And the adaptation doesn't just happen on the street level, it has to happen at the bureaucratic level, too.
Right.
The WHO and its partners realized that their own red tape was killing people, so they established what is called the humanitarian mechanism.
What does that bypass?
Normally, for a government or an NGO to import a new vaccine, it has to go through a very slow, methodical, regulatory pathway within the recipient country. The Ministry of Health has to review the clinical data, issue licenses, and approve the batch.
Which is great for safety during peacetime.
But in an emergency, a 3-month regulatory delay means thousands of dead children.
Yeah.
The humanitarian mechanism, along with specific flexibilities from JVI, allows NGOs and civil society organizations to bypass those standard national approvals if the government is non-functional or hostile.
Oh, wow.
They rely on pre-existing WHO pre-qualification decisions to verify the safety of the vaccine, allowing them to procure affordable, quality-assured vaccines and drop them into the field immediately, regardless of what the paralyzed local bureaucracy says.
So we have these incredible workarounds. Low-profile coolers, WhatsApp remote management, hit-and-run operations. Yeah. But I keep coming back to the fundamental tension here.
Yeah.
How do you balance the desperate need for speed with the slow, delicate process of earning community trust? Think about a hit-and-run operation. If a team of strangers rushes into a village, frantically sticks needles in kids' arms, and then sprints away before the militia shows up, doesn't that look exactly like the kind of hostile, suspicious activity that breeds distrust in the first place?
Yeah.
How does a mother know they aren't the CIA?
You are identifying the most precarious tightrope in global health. And the hard truth is, you cannot substitute speed for trust. Ever.
Okay.
If the community does not accept you, a hit-and-run operation will fail, the parents will hide their children, or worse, the sudden intrusion will provoke violence from the community itself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is why the tactical playbook is utterly useless without the diplomatic playbook. You can have the best cold chain and the fastest jeeps, but eventually you have to cross a checkpoint. You have to knock on a door.
Which brings us to the most complex part of our deep dive. The intense diplomacy required to deliver care, the ethical landmines of doing so, and how this entire process might actually serve as a peacemaker.
It's fascinating.
Let's look at how they actually get permission to cross that checkpoint.
The implementation guides detail a process called Local Access Negotiations, or LAN. This is vastly different from international diplomacy. This isn't men in tailored suits sitting around a polished mahogany table in Geneva drafting a treaty. This is a local doctor standing on a dirt road, negotiating with an 18-year-old holding a Kalashnikov.
The sources outline very specific tactics for LAN. They make it clear that you cannot just rely on permission from the capital city.
Never.
The team has to engage local religious leaders, tribal elders, and very frequently they have to negotiate directly with armed non-state actors, like rebel militias, insurgent groups, local warlords.
Because in a fractured state, power is hyper-local. The Ministry of Health might claim jurisdiction, but the local imam or the tribal elder is the one who actually holds the trust of the neighborhood.
Right.
If the tribal elder vouches for the vaccination team, the mothers will bring their children out. And the armed actors, who usually rely on the local community for shelter and support, are far more likely to grant safe passage if the community elders demand it.
That makes total sense.
Sometimes, if the tension is too high, the health teams have to use a neutral third party, like the Red Cross or a local business leader, to mediate the safe passage.
And this intense, localized pressure brings up some really thorny ethical dilemmas. In routine, peacetime healthcare, everything relies on signed, informed consent.
Yeah.
You go to the doctor, they explain the risks, and you sign a piece of paper acknowledging it. But in a humanitarian emergency, the WHO guidelines acknowledge that relying on verbal consent is often the only way forward.
Think about the context of a quick in-and-out operation. You have a 2-hour window before the shelling resumes. You do not have time to sit down, translate a legal document, and process paperwork.
Right.
Furthermore, in many of these conflict settings, the civilian population is deeply, profoundly suspicious of signing any official-looking document.
I'd imagine so.
A piece of paper with their name on it could be used by a hostile government to track them, tax them, or arrest them. Demanding a signature might cause them to refuse the vaccine entirely. Verbal consent, granted in the presence of a trusted community leader, becomes the only practical and ethical way to proceed.
But the policy texts go even further into the ethical weeds. They discuss extreme cases of imminent disease threat, scenarios where a highly contagious virus poses a significant risk of substantial harm to a massive number of people, like an Ebola outbreak in an IDP camp.
Yeah, the real nightmare scenarios.
In those extreme cases, the texts discuss the ethical balance of implementing what they call compulsory vaccination.
Compulsory vaccination is the nuclear option of public health. It raises profound questions about bodily autonomy, sovereignty, and human rights.
Definitely.
Can a state or an international body physically override an individual's refusal to be vaccinated during a severe emergency?
It sounds incredibly authoritarian, especially in a war zone where people have already lost all their other rights.
It is, and the guidelines are hyper-aware of this. They state that any program that curtails personal liberties, like mandatory quarantines or compulsory vaccines, must rigorously balance competing ethical principles. It must respect international human rights agreements, it must be proportionate to the actual threat, and it must be applied equitably, not just used to target minority groups.
But the tension remains.
Exactly. You are weighing the liberty of the individual against the biological survival of the entire population. If one person refuses a vaccine and becomes the incubator for a mutated strain that kills 1,000 people, whose rights take precedence?
It is an impossible ethical calculus. But I want to look at the other side of that coin. Instead of medicine being this coercive force or a victim of war, the source material also explores how the act of providing health might actually heal the conflict itself.
This is, without a doubt, the most hopeful concept in the literature.
Yeah.
It relies on a very simple biological reality. Pathogens do not respect borders. A virus does not wear a uniform. It does not care if you are a rebel or a loyalist, and it does not recognize a ceasefire line. A virus is a shared existential enemy. And to stop it, adversaries are often forced to cooperate.
The 2014 Journal from MedAct and the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War highlights exactly this dynamic. They provide a striking example of grassroots cooperation that defies all political logic. They document Palestinian physicians training inside Israeli hospitals.
It is a remarkable case study. The political context there is obviously incredibly tense, with long-standing, deep-seated conflict.
Absolutely.
What's fascinating here is that the official positions of both the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority frequently oppose or severely restrict this kind of cross-border collaboration. The political leadership on both sides often views it as unacceptable fraternization.
But at the grassroots level, driven by NGOs and the medical professionals themselves, it happens anyway. The doctors find a way.
Because when the human body breaks down, the political rhetoric suddenly matters a lot less.
Yeah.
A complex heart defect in a newborn child or a rapidly spreading viral infection requires the exact same physiological treatment regardless of the patient's nationality or religion. The doctors recognize that biology supersedes ideology. The sources suggest that this day-to-day pragmatic cooperation at the grassroots level, doctors working shoulder to shoulder, sharing equipment, discussing cases.
It builds something.
It fosters a mutual humanity that official peace treaties often fail to achieve.
It treats medicine as a bridge. The journal mentions entries for the Holdstock Piochot Prize, which highlight a new generation of medical students and researchers who are utilizing complex systems modeling to map the root causes of conflict.
Yeah.
They are specifically focusing on how health professionals and the implementation of equitable health systems can actively prevent war.
It is a paradigm shift. They are treating war itself not as an inevitable political outcome, but as a preventable public health crisis.
Wow.
If lack of resources, inequity, and disease are the kindling for violent conflict, then a robust, equitable health system is the water that puts the fire out before it starts.
It's a beautiful concept.
Yeah.
But I have to push you on the reality of it. Let's go back to the local access negotiations. If an international aid group or a local NGO sits down and formally negotiates with a brutal rebel militia to secure safe passage for a vaccine delivery,
Yeah.
doesn't that inherently give the militia a degree of political legitimacy?
Yes, unavoidably.
So how do health workers walk that tightrope? How do you stop a virus without unintentionally validating or even funding a violent regime that is causing the suffering in the first place?
It is the ultimate humanitarian dilemma, and there is no clean answer. By negotiating with a non-state armed group, you are acknowledging their de facto control over a territory.
Right.
You are treating them as a sovereign entity. National governments absolutely despise this. They accuse NGOs of legitimizing terrorists.
I'm sure they do.
But from the perspective of the health worker on the ground, the ethical calculus is brutally clear. The virus is an immediate, mathematically certain threat to the children in that area.
Yeah.
If you refuse to negotiate with the warlord on principle, you are effectively letting the disease win just to preserve political optics.
You are sacrificing the children to punish the militia.
Exactly. Humanitarianism, in its purest form, requires prioritizing the biological survival of the vulnerable over the political sensitivities of the state. You negotiate with whoever holds the key to the gate.
Wow.
It is a perilous, morally gray tightrope, but it is the only way across the chasm.
Wow. Okay. Let's take a breath and recap the incredible journey of this deep dive. We started by looking at the tragic, disproportionate math of conflict zones, how 16 nations, representing just a fraction of the globe, bear the overwhelming burden of ancient diseases like polio and measles, because war systematically dismantles their public health firewalls.
And we examined the devastating impact of weaponized healthcare. We saw how intelligence operations and the blurring of military and medical lines shattered local trust, leading directly to the heartbreaking assassinations of frontline workers in places like Pakistan and Nigeria.
We exposed the gaping, intentional holes in international planning, where millions of displaced refugees are bureaucratically erased, and where global funding heavily favors the easy audit of physical commodities, the vials of vaccine, over the messy, dangerous work of strengthening the human systems needed to deliver them.
Right. And we explored the incredible tactical resilience of local health workers, their operational playbook, utilizing rapid control rooms, remote WhatsApp management, perfectly calibrated cold chains, and high-risk hit-and-run operations with unmarked coolers.
It's amazing.
It demonstrates a profound capacity for innovation under the most dangerous conditions imaginable.
Finally, we looked at the intense, localized diplomacy required to deliver that care, navigating the ethical minefields of verbal consent, the grim reality of negotiating with armed militias, and the hopeful possibility that our shared vulnerability to disease might force adversaries into grassroots cooperation.
It is a vast, complex, and deeply human landscape.
It really is.
Yeah.
So next time you are scrolling through your feed and you see a headline about a disease outbreak in a conflict zone, remember that you aren't just looking at a biological failure. The science is settled. We know exactly how to stop the virus.
Right.
You are looking at a geopolitical failure. And the people trying to fix it aren't just doctors in white coats. They are diplomats, tacticians, and local heroes, armed with nothing but low-profile coolers, immense courage, and a refusal to let the battlefield win.
They are holding the line for the rest of humanity.
I want to leave you with a final concept to mull over, building on this idea that health can be a vehicle for peace. If violent conflict creates the perfect chaotic breeding ground for microscopic pathogens to mutate and spread, could the reverse also be true?
That's the big question.
What if the ultimate prerequisite for lasting global peace isn't shared economic interests or military deterrence or political treaties? What if the only thing that can actually force us to stop fighting is the undeniable shared biological vulnerability of the human body?
Yeah.
What if we only truly lay down our weapons when we realize that the virus is coming for all of us, and the only way to survive is to heal our enemy?
That is a profound question to consider.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will catch you next time. We started by talking about the magic of modern medicine, mapping genomes and 3D printing tissue. Just remember, all that magic is entirely useless if we can't build enough human trust to deliver a simple 2-cent drop of vaccine into the mouth of a child in a war zone.